why people on earth appear to reap things that they haven't sown. So in this discussion, we're talking about compensation and reaping and sowing in kind specifically.
And we've said it's predictable.
And reliable. And you can't get away from it. Exactly. It's definitely going to happen. Yeah. So why is it then, if we always reap in kind, that it seems like some people who haven't given much and haven't done much good in their life seem to get a lot of good things and have a lot of things? Because that would seem to oppose the idea that we reap in kind.
Well, firstly, we need to make some comments about what people on earth believe is good. What people on earth believe is good is not what God believes is good. And frequently what the person is getting, which is exactly what they have sowed, they're reaping exactly what they've sowed. Other people might see it as good, but it's actually not very good at all from God's perspective. They're actually sowing a lot of badness and reaping a lot of badness. A good example of that would be, let's say a person grows up in their childhood to expect that they can just get everything on a platter. Like their mum and dad, due to their own emotional injuries, mum and dad have made it so the child doesn't have to work, the child doesn't have to do anything, for its survival. The child doesn't have to demonstrate any self-responsibility. The child can always rely on mummy and daddy for everything. The child doesn't have to, go out and earn a living or contribute to society in any way. Mummy and daddy do that for them. Yeah. And so by the time that child is an adult now, the child may have a very, from the outward appearance, people on earth may believe that child has an idealistic existence.
Because because of their entitled feeling, well,
mummy and daddy are still looking after them. And if not mummy and daddy, then they would have attached themselves through the law of attraction to other people who will look after them.
Yeah.
They might have money that they've received from mummy and daddy. Mummy and daddy have worked real hard. Mm-hmm. They haven't spent their money, and so they gave it all to the child and so forth, as many parents do nowadays.
Yeah.
And so this child now as an adult is now a very selfish, self-centered individual who believes everything should be on a plate and that everything that happens in the world is for them to enjoy, and there's no consequence and there's no responsibility that they need to bear, and there's nothing they need to produce, there's nothing they need to do in order to be a part of society. Now, from the world's perspective today, that person would seem to be in an idyllic position.
Well, they seem to be getting everything on a platter.
They're wealthy, they're getting everything on a platter. Right? From God's perspective, that person's in an absolutely shocking position. Mm. Their soul is in a terribly dark condition. Mm-hmm. And God's laws are trying to correct that person. But most people on earth are not very, what I would call, what's the word I'm looking for? Like they're not in harmony with the way God's laws work. They're only in harmony with earth-based desires and passions.
Yeah.
So they're not in alignment with God's laws. Mm-hmm. So God's laws are trying to correct that selfish individual and their behaviour and their thoughts and desires. But many people in society will be assisting them, pandering to them, trying to share in that lifestyle, if you like. And this is where, it gets very, very confusing for the person to see what part is God delivering, and God's laws delivering, and what part is actually of human creation.
So, and here, because God's laws are clearly more powerful than humans.
Of course.
However,
but a human's will.
That's right. It's the
supreme.
Will. The will is the moment by moment decisions is the only thing that is not governed by God's. It's governed
by God's laws,
but it's not dictated to.
Well, it is dictated to a degree, but only if the person chooses to be so. They can choose the opposite. Yes. The person's allowed to make a choice to disobey.
That's what I mean.
And the person is making a choice to disobey, and the world sees those choices as rewarding.
Yes.
And so therefore the world has the viewpoint that that's the behaviour to engage. Mm-hmm. But from God's perspective, the soul of that individual is degrading to such a terrible extent that they'll end up in a very, very terrible place after they pass. Now, so the first reason why it doesn't always appear to be so, like reaping what you're sowing in kind, is because on earth today, humanity has this viewpoint of what is good, which is in severe disharmony with what God's viewpoint of what is good. And so we don't measure things the way God measures them anymore. We measure them using our own rulers, if you like, our own measuring stick, our own standards, not God's. And this is one reason why we often get to the stage where we look at a person's life and we think, oh, look, they're seemingly getting all these rewards, but we're not seeing all the penalties. In fact, the person themselves is in complete ignorance of all the soul-based penalties. And when we look at it, because we're not sensitive to the soul-based penalties, we're not seeing the soul-based penalties either.
So to clarify, this compensation in kind, are you saying that it only applies to the soul? Or does it not apply to our physical existence?
No, all compensation only applies to the soul, and the physical existence is a flow-on effect of what happens to the soul.
So my account balance in the bank
could be the result.
Is that a compensation in kind?
No. Not necessarily. It could have come from your parents' money bank. It could have come from you ripping off society. It could have come from you lying and stealing. It could have come from a number of different areas, all of which are out of harmony with love, or it could have come from being in harmony with love. It could have come from any one of these things, right? The problem is that we see a good bank balance as more important than a soul condition, and so we don't even measure the soul condition that was squandered obtaining the good bank balance. And so this is where we get way out of harmony, and therefore we get very confused. Instead of seeing the condition of the individual, which is what God's laws measure, the soul-based condition of the individual, we only see the outward effects of what's happened. So we see a person in power and think, and many times we honour them and respect them and so forth. We see a person who's educated, we honour and respect them, but we have no idea what soul-based things that they have done, said, thought in order to obtain what they've obtained. And therefore, frequently, we're honouring someone who's in a terribly dark condition. And unfortunately, that's what we often do. And so we can't assume that if someone has a good finances, for example, that it's because they have a good soul condition, or that it was even the results of their own doing. Because there could be the results of many things, including their own negative doings, their own unloving doings. But it could be because of the unloving doings of somebody else as well. You know, there's so many possible causes.
But there must be a compensation in kind at some point in their existence. Is that what you're saying?
There will be, yes. There always is. There always is. If you've lied in order to obtain financial wealth, then you're going to have some quite severe compensation down the track for that, right? And some of that is going to be financial at some point, even if it's after you've passed, where you're now so embroiled in the monetary system, you can't give it up, but there's no money anymore. So what do you do with that? You know, and there's many people in the hells of the spirit world who are still embroiled in the financial system of the earth because they can't give up the concept of money, right? And they've done everything they can to lie, steal, cheat, even sexually done things in order to attain it. And all of those things need to be corrected. And they're refusing to even correct them after they've passed, but they're in such terribly dark conditions. It's almost most people on earth would not be able to imagine their condition that's so bad. And so the trouble is we're not measuring it because we're not measuring it by God's standards. We're only measuring it by human standards. And this is where the human definition of love, which in our assistance groups we talk about being evil, you know, the erroneous version of love, you know, the evil version of love, if you like. The evil is a term that we coined or defined as being the opposite to God's definition of love. And frequently humans' definition of love is opposite to God's definition of love. And remember that compensatory laws are all about God's laws, and therefore God's definition of love being imposed by the law. Yeah. So it's important for us to understand that when something seemingly looks fine on the outside, God's laws don't measure it from what it looks like on the outside like you do, or most people on earth do. God's laws don't do that. God's laws measure what's gone in the soul to create that condition.
But when it comes to the compensation will occur based on what is in the soul.
Yes. Yeah. And that eventually will have physical and spiritual flow-ons, of course.
Yes.
So many times, for example, a person who's stolen from people to create wealth, eventually they get stolen from. Or if they haven't been stolen from, they lose their relationships because everyone around them knows that they're liars and cheaters.
Yes.
And eventually they finish up losing a lot of their relationships. So while they may have wealth, they very frequently have a very unhappy life as a result of their wealth. Many of them engage in irresponsible, self-irresponsible behaviour, where they are, taking a lot of drugs or drinking a lot. And that all has a flow-on effect as a result of their desire only for wealth and not to consider anything else. So, there's a lot of flow-on effects. It's just, do we want to measure them?
Yes.
Most of the time we don't want to measure them. And that brings me to the second point, really, which is we want to remain ignorant of what the compensation actually is.
Yes.
We want to ignore it completely. We want to make out that this cancer that I have in my body has to be been created by someone else.
Yeah.
Even though it's my body, I believe that it has to be created by someone else. I'd even prefer to believe that it's some problem with God's system of things, God, nature, than it is with me. That's what I'd prefer to believe. Right? And that's why most people never cure it.
Yeah.
And they die from it because they never find its actual cause. They don't see the compensation being implied.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, and then you've also mentioned that very often we're reaping the benefits of other people's compensation, their sowing.
Yeah,
basically.
So like my mother and father might have been very industrious people. For example, what might have happened is years ago they might have grown up in a society where there wasn't much money, and they experienced what it was like to be poor. And they basically said, I don't want to experience what it's like to be poor anymore. I'm going to work hard, and I'm going to be through that process of working hard, I'm going to earn some money and so forth. And I'm going to establish a life where that I'm not poor anymore. And usually those kind of people don't spend much of their money.
No.
And so what happens is they finish up leaving a lot of it to their children. Now, most of the time, the children of those kind of people are very selfish, self-involved, very rarely do anything to help other people in society, and they squander all the money that mummy and daddy earned because they don't appreciate how it got earned. And that's assuming, of course, you live in a Western society. In a third world society, it's very, very hard, no matter how hard you work, to get any more than your subsistence or existence. So, you can't then say that a person in the third world who has just got their existence, who works very hard for it, is worse in a soul way than a person in the Western world who has had to work less but got more. In fact, the person in the Western world is actually in a lesser condition than the person in the third world if you just measure that one aspect of a soul quality.
Yes.
Because the person in the third world obviously understands what it's like to live in an existence where you work very hard for it. The person in the Western world has very little appreciation frequently of the gifts they've been given by having just been by chance born in a location that causes them to not have that, or to not have to eke out an existence. So again, we frequently don't value where it came from. Where like particularly in Western society, we frequently don't value where things came from. And a lot of what we have comes from the hard work of others. And a person who's truly grateful will understand that and see that. A person who's not grateful will believe he created the whole thing for himself,
So basically you're saying when it appears that I'm reaping something that I haven't sown, there's a number of scenarios. One, I'm just kind of taking credit for the harvest that has got nothing to do with me.
No, like frequently it's the harvest of others' hard work.
Yes. It could be that, well, it definitely is that I'm not measuring the full compensatory effects upon my soul and in the other aspects of my life. As God sees it. As God sees it.
Because I see it as humans see it only.
Yes.
And not as God sees it.
So, for example, in the example you gave with the parents who worked very, very hard, they obviously had a feeling, an unreleased feeling of lack and fear. So while they might have had a big bank balance, they were obviously still living with the compensated, their fear would have been compounded.
They couldn't enjoy their bank balance ever.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's why they never spent it. And that's why they gave it to their children.
Yes. So that's a compensation in kind.
It is of a kind. And the children squandering is a compensation for the parent as well. The fact that the child now didn't have to earn it and did not appreciate it is also a compensation for the parent. So
they're in the spirit world feeling the compensatory effects.
Trust me, you're in the spirit world and you earned millions of dollars and you gave it to your children and they just spent it, or just blew it on things that are completely unnecessary in your mind, you're going to be pretty stressed about it.
So, and we're refusing to measure the effects on all of our energy systems, on our entire existence, our entire soul, the thoughts, words, actions, beliefs, quality of life.
We frequently don't examine emotions, for example, or desires. We frequently don't even look at our thoughts. We think our thoughts are fine, no matter how bad or unloving they may be, as long as we don't do anything about it, is the general gist of things. Then we're fine. Unfortunately, for the majority of us too, we do everything we can to meet our addictions. Right, everything we can, and we do a lot there. People murder, have abortions and all that to meet addictions. Like at the end of the day, meeting addictions is a very high priority for the whole of humanity. And we don't see all the negative consequences of that either on the soul because we don't measure them. We don't see that a lot of our diseases, physical diseases, are the direct results of our unloving behaviour in the way in which we conducted ourselves in our life. And in particular, the way we feel and think. We don't see our diseases as a consequence of that, but they are. And this is where we're not measuring truthfully, because we don't want to. We want to remain ignorant. We want to continue the sin, and therefore remain ignorant as to what causes the sin. It causes the sort of the effects that we're seeing from the sin. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah. I think the compensation in kind feels sometimes like a tricky one because we're so used to measuring the physical, like illness, or what I sowed an illness and now I've got an illness, or it's sort of it's a funny one to get a feeling.
I don't think so. Like my feelings are, most people on earth are physically centric, and what I mean by that, their whole life revolves around their physical existence. Now, if your whole life revolves around your physical existence, you are going to struggle with compensation in kind because you're not measuring the soul-based existence, the effect on your soul, and then the subsequent flow-on effects that it has onto your physical existence and your physical body. Most people on earth also have no desire whatsoever to see that something that's internal to oneself is caused by an emotion or actions that are unloving that came from within themselves. So they're not willing to see that. They want to blame something external to themselves all the time. And so they're not willing to examine truthfully the actual cause of something. So for someone who's not willing to examine truthfully the actual cause, compensation in kind is going to be a very difficult concept to grasp. Because they're not really seeing what's going on at the soul level anymore. They're only looking at the physical. And also most people on earth have no concept of a future aside from earth. And so they feel that many of their decisions are justified by the fact that when they're dead, they're gone. And they don't exist anymore. So they then justify, even to the point of killing another person, will justify doing that in order to protect their own existence. And this in itself is driven by some pretty negative emotions. But frequently we only know about them after we've passed, because we don't believe that there is anything that's going to happen to us after we pass. We believe that engaging in any behaviour is fine as long as we survive.
Yeah.
And that in itself also is going to prevent us from seeing compensation in kind
Yeah.
accurately.
Yeah. Thank you.